the old neighborhood. If you're driving to Parkland from downtown, your best bet is to take the Dan Ryan Expressway, I-57, which cleaves like a wide river with a bend here and a My name is Eric Charles May, the author of Bedrock Faith, the 2021 One Book, One Chicago selection by the Chicago Public Library.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jennifer Lezak, Coordinator of Special Projects with the Adult Services Department, and on behalf of everyone at the Chicago Public Library, welcome. This event is part of the 2021 One Book, One Chicago season, exploring the theme Neighborhoods, Our City's Bedrock, and the book Bedrock Faith by Eric Charles May. Please visit onebookonechicago.org for other upcoming programs, reading recommendations, on-demand video content, and more coming now through the end of the year. This program is possible, and One Book, One Chicago is generously funded by donations to the Chicago Public Library Foundation. Visit cplfoundation.org for information on how you can get involved with their work. During tonight's program, we encourage you to leave your questions in the chat for our Q&A following the program. Now, I'm so excited to welcome tonight's program featuring author David Sadowski. Chicago's system of elevated railways, known locally as the L, has run continuously since 1892, and like the city, has never stood still. It helped neighborhoods grow, brought their increasingly diverse populations together, and gave the famous loop its name. But today's system has changed radically over the years. The L is more than just a way of getting around. Its trains are a place where people meet and interact. Some say the best way to experience the city is via the L with its second-story view. Author David Sadowski grew up riding the L all over the city. He's the author of Chicago Trolleys and Building Chicago's Subways, and runs the online Trolley Dodger blog. His latest book, Chicago's Lost L's, is virtually a secret history of Chicago, and this is your ticket. Please join me in welcoming author David Sadowski. David, so pleased to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I will start my program now, and we'll look at a bunch of pictures, and hopefully you will enjoy it, and we'll do the questions and answers at the end. So we'll get started. This is one of a trifecta of books that I've done about Chicago and its transit history, and who knows, maybe in the future there will be more. This is a gate car, an elevated gate car. As you can see, this conductor is opening and closing the gates so you can let people on the train. On some of the metal L cars up till the early 1950s, the conductor had to ride between the cars to open the doors in any weather. The L got started for the Columbian Exposition, and actually there was an electric railway. It was an experimental one, Columbian Intramural Railway at the fair. This is a map in my book. It shows when all the different branches of the L were started up till the time of the Chicago Transit Authority takeover in 1947. By 1917, the L had been around for 25 years and reached most of its extent here. This is the map of the South Side L, the first elevated. It has a main line and some branch lines. It went to various places. We'll discuss those. Here it is under construction in 1890. This is around 35th Street, it copied L's that were in New York City. Used steam at first on this line and the Lake Street L. Electricity came later. That was a new thing. So the 35th Street station, as it originally looked, on the south side L, also known by some people as the Alley L. It had eventually 3 tracks for most of the way, an express track and going in one direction in rush hour, and then 2 local tracks. This is near 18th Street. This is Bronzeville near 39th Street, 1941. Uh, 40th in Indiana, an important changeover point between the Kenwood lines, the Stockyards lines, and trains heading further south. A lot of 3-car trains on the L back then. It had a 3-man crew, and it was unfortunately all men. It's the 58th Street station with its original building. There's only one building of that kind left, and it's at 55th. It's not in use anymore, but it still exists. This is how it looked in 2013. This is the L crossing Garfield Boulevard, 55th. This is the Harvard station on the Englewood branch, probably right after it opened around 1908. This is the L passing over Little Englewood Station. You can see the Southtown Theater at left. And this is the Halsted Street Station, probably again right after it opened, around 1908, on the Englewood branch. You could catch other trains here or buses for points further south than 63rd Street. This is the Jackson Park branch going over the Illinois Central. Before the IC was electrified, that is now the Metro Electric down below. And the line was at Stony Island at Jackson Park. And originally it went further east into the grounds of the World's Columbian Exposition. This is a Stockyards train, again, a gate car. If you wondered why there isn't a Stockyards branch anymore, this is the reason, because we have this thing called refrigeration, and you don't need to have a Stockyards anymore. So along with the Stockyards vanishing, so did the train. There was a fire in 1934, said to be the worst since the Great Chicago Fire in 1871, but they rebuilt the L. The building at straight ahead is a bank building. That's about the only thing in this picture that still exists. Some more pictures of the Stockyards L, which had a loop, single track loop, which went around. Here's a single track loop, which went around some of the places there like Swift and Packers, the meat packing companies. It was never really very highly utilized line. It was always run as a shuttle. The only time it had any ridership was when they had conventions at the International Amphitheater. This is a year after the Stockyards branch closed in 1957, the remnants of one of the stations. The Kenwood branch also branched off from 40th in Indiana, heading east. It was built on an embankment mostly. It was owned by a different company, the Chicago Junction Railway, and it was leased to the Rapid Transit. This is one of the stations look like. Most of them look like this, kind of Spartan. Near the lake, the Kenwood branch headed south. Then ran over some L structure, metal structure for a short period of time before it reached the end of the line at 42nd and Oakenwald. There's a bunch of coal being stored underneath the L. You'd think that would be a fire hazard. This is the end of the line at 42nd and Oakenwald. The small yard that they had there, probably right after it opened in the early 1900s. I made the acquaintance of a man in this picture, the toddler in this 1945 picture, Ross Serrano, Japanese American, who was born in an internment camp, and then his family for many years lived right at the end of the line there at the Kenwood L. This is inside one of the Kenwood trains in the 1950s, these wooden L cars. When the CTA came into being, they took over this line, and all the others, they made this into just a shuttle operation. It only went as far as 40th in Indiana. Then there also was another shuttle operation, a small line going to Humboldt Park, branching off of the Englewood L. Started out here at 63rd and Harvard, and just ran to 69th Street, only 3/4 of a mile. So this is the shortest L branch of them all. This is as far south as the L went until the Dan Ryan line opened in 1969. The Lake Street L started with steam, just as the South Side L did. Here it is under construction in 1892. Going over the Chicago River with a swing bridge under steam. The distinctive Queen Anne style architecture some of the stations still have. I believe that's Ashland. There was a transfer station with the Metropolitan L around Paulina, starting in 1913. Again, the distinctive Queen Anne style architecture on the Lake Street L. At Laramie, heading west to Oak Park, there was a ramp going down to ground level, and the Lake Street L ran on the ground from 1901 until 1962. This is the Ridgeland station in Oak Park. It ran in South Boulevard. Again, this is downtown Oak Park. This is a very early picture, early 1900s. This is what the same area looked like. This is the Wisconsin Avenue station, now called Marion Street in Oak Park. Nearby, the Chicago Northwestern had commuter trains on an embankment. Steam up until about 1956. This is the last day of the ground level operation in October 1962, before the L was put onto the nearby embankment, which was a win-win for everybody concerned. This is about a year or two later. Already they were getting rid of every trace of the L that had been on the ground. And now, of course, Metro has taken over the commuter trains from the Chicago Northwestern. This is the Union Pacific West line. And now the L has a yard out that way. This is how it looks today. Now this map mostly shows the Metropolitan West Side Elevated, which was built electric right from the start, opened in 1895 and had several branches. It was built down the center of blocks instead of next to an alley or in a street. Here's some people, early workers on the Met. Another is a conductor, probably at Logan Square. At first, the trains terminated downtown inside a building, but it was an inadequate situation, very congested. And then the solution came up with, then in 1897, was the loop, combining everything on the loop. It's a connecting track which went from the Met to the loop. Trains crossed the Chicago River over a bridge which had 4 tracks. It was actually 2 bridges side by side. Here, this is just west of the loop at Canal Street, heading over the trains going into Union Station. in 1924. This is just west of there. Garfield Park L, the Metropolitan Main Line. That huge building in the back is the powerhouse for the Met. You had to make your own power back then. You couldn't just buy all this electricity commercially. Everything branched off or came together at Marshfield Junction, about 1700 West, Douglas Park on the left, Garfield Park in the middle, Logan Square and Humboldt Park on the right. Here's a train going to the northwest side, Logan Square and Humboldt Park. Douglas Park L was extended to Berwyn, ran there until starting in 1920s. Here it is at Oak Park Avenue, the end of the line. This is 50th Avenue Station, which was then later moved to the Illinois Railway Museum, and that's the interior of it, how it looks now. The Garfield Park L had to go to make way for the Congress Expressway, now the Eisenhower Expressway, and here's how that looked in 1953, right after it closed. For a few years, then the Garfield Park trains ran on the ground in a portion of Van Buren Street with third rail. Here's the Garfield Park station at California Avenue. The station at Pulaski, showing a typical Met L architecture, the stairways. The Cicero Avenue station. And then west of Cicero, there was a ramp, excuse me, going down to ground level, the rest of the way out. They had a large yard at Laramie Avenue. Here we're looking east. And then the same thing looking to the west from Laverne. Laramie Avenue in the 1950s. By this time, the Congress Expressway is open to Laramie, as far west as Laramie only. So cars are coming and going off that. Here the L is passing the south end of Columbus Park near Central Avenue. This Gunderson Station was built to serve a development there at Gunderson Avenue in Oak Park, running on ground level. This is Oak Park Avenue in 1935, looking north. Some of those buildings are still there. End of the line is Des Plaines Avenue as it looked in the 1950s with a loop to turn the L trains back around. Crossing Des Plaines Avenue around 1953. Same location in 1959 as construction of the Congress Expressway was well underway, now the Eisenhower I-290. There was a branch line running over part of the Aurora and Elgin Interurban, branching out over to Bellwood and Westchester, ended at Manheim and 22nd Street. Here's a Westchester car branching off from the Chicago Aurora and Elgin main line in Bellwood. One of the stations is the Bellwood station, right before it opened. Crossing Madison Street in Bellwood in the early 1950s. This line was shut down in December 1951. Roosevelt Road Station in the late 1920s as they were extending the line further south to 22nd Street. Here's the new connection between the Douglas Park L and the Congress Expressway at right, and then the old connection heading north on the Paulina L at left. For one day, then you had old L's and new L's running at the same time, June 21, 1958. Logan Square and Humboldt Park trains here at North and Damon, and then there's a tower you can see in the background where trains headed to Humboldt Park. This is Logan Square Terminal in 1908. as far west as the train went in the northwest side until 1970. And then here it is in same station, 1958. The interior of the station. I remember this well. This was actually my favorite L station when I was a kid. And they had a bookstore there, newsstand, magazines, paperback books. I love this station. I was sad when they closed it. A control tower. Switches were controlled by these levers, which had to have a lot of strength to pull. It's called an interlocking. There's a motorman on a Metropolitan L train in the early days. Some more Met L workers. Here they are in the Humboldt Park branch, early 1900s. This is a two-car train going to Logan Square and Humboldt Park, and they would have separated these two cars at Damon and North Avenue. The Paulina L, this is the Madison Street station, right by where United Center is now. Looking to the west, where the Chicago Stadium was actually under construction when this picture was taken in the late 1920s. Looking to the east, here's a Madison Street streetcar movie theater showing a Jean Harlow movie. She had just died, 1937. Here is some construction going on the Humboldt Park branch. The Humboldt Park crossing. This is Humboldt Avenue Station in 1949. End of the line, only went to about 3700 west, which really wasn't far enough. It didn't really have its own yard either. There were plans to extend it, this never happened. CTA turned it into a shuttle line, and you had to walk a long distance to get to the Damon and North station. It was rather inconvenient. Here, there two trains collided near the end of the line. They were both trying to do the same thing at the same time and just ran into each other. And here's why Humboldt Park didn't last, because the CTA built this subway extending to downtown from there, and it just didn't fit in with their plans. So here's the new connection of Douglas Park to Lake Street trains used today by the Pink Line, and then the left is the old connection of the Paulina L. And there's a bridge that is from that still left, and it's being used by Metro trains as a signal bridge. And this is the L station at Damon and North Avenue. And the building in back, once housed the Double Door Rock Club. This is the Northwestern Elevated, which had a branch built called the Ravenswood. Just north of the Chicago River, the old Northwestern Station, which closed in 1911. This is the new station being built in the same site in around 1930 for the Merchandise Mart, one of the world's largest buildings. The original station entrance at Chicago Avenue dates to the early 1900s. These two cars are the ones that have been saved as the historic cars by the CTA, but here they are in actual service. This is the Willow Station, which was torn down for construction of the State Street subway ramp, which went here, closed in 1942. Here's a southbound train at Belmont. Baseball today, there was a doubleheader. This is 1968. The only station on the Ravenswood that was actually closed was the station called Ravenswood. Here, I believe this is Rockwell, ground level portion of the Ravenswood L, today's Brown Line. The original terminal, end of the line at Lawrence and Kimball. Again, Lawrence and Kimball, probably around 1949, showing the original station. has been changed twice since then. The Northwestern elevated its main line, 4-track main line heading north. And it connected here with a freight line. Again, you can see on the right, this is near Wilson Avenue. You can see the freight line descending down to ground level on the ramp at right. The station at Wilson Avenue, when they opened a ground level portion around 1908. This is when service was started on the ground level portion. This freight line here, which went by Wrigley Field and headed north, is actually how the Northwestern else extended its service north of Wilson Avenue. They took over a commuter rail line and freight line, which had been there. Milwaukee Road on that. This is an old Milwaukee Road commuter station at rear, and a freight train that the Rapid Transit had. This is the Wilson Avenue yard, which doesn't exist anymore. Lower Wilson Yard, which also doesn't exist anymore. Uptown, Wilson Avenue, it was a boom town in the 1920s, thanks to the L. 1929. This is a building here designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, called the Store Arcade Building, which was here they're showing it being torn down in 1922 because they were going to replace it with this new Uptown Union Station, which has been recently renovated and looks good as new. Here they took the ground level portion of the train north of there, and they're building the embankment, which now 100 years later is being rebuilt. This is the opening of the station at Lawrence Avenue. Now it's completely being rebuilt now. They had the 4-track main line and a freight track heading south here at this point. This is an Evanston Express Shoppers Special heading south on this freight track in 1955. Before they had third rail installed on that track. This is Howard Avenue. To the left, it was the North Shoreline trains. To the right, the Evanston branch of the L. Howard Yard being rebuilt and reconstructed in 1949 once the CTA took over. Map showing the branches going to Skokie and Evanston. Originally, service ended at Central Avenue in Evanston, all at ground level, but eventually it was all put onto an embankment. Here they're building the embankment at left, while the trains continue at ground level on right. They put up one track at a time. This is the Calvary Station, which was only in business for a very short period of time. It closed in 1931, had no ridership because it went to a cemetery. This is Central Avenue, the first train going over the raised portion of Central Avenue in the late 1920s. This Central Avenue station and facade under construction. And here's how it looks today in Evanston. There was a station at Isabella at the north end of Evanston, very lightly used station. It showed up in the credits to the Bob Newhart show opening. Here at Linden Avenue, this North Shoreline track has just been cut off in 1955 because that portion of the North Shore Line interurban was abandoned. Here's the opening of the Niles Center branch of the L in 1925. Niles Center train. This is branch was abandoned in 1948, but now was revived in 1964 as the Skokie Swift, which is now today's Yellow Line, one of the stations on the Niles Center branch. It had some very distinctive architecture, another station on the Niles Center branch. All these stations have been removed many years ago. The interior of the Asbury station in Evanston, as it was when new. This is the end of the line for the this branch in Dempster Street in Skokie, and a pocket track. This is, I think, East Prairie Road. Station had entrances on two sides. Now the Skokie Swift took over. After the North Shore Line quit, the CTA bought 5 miles of right-of-way and made the Skokie Swift, which is today's Yellow Line. The Dempster Station has been saved and moved so that you could have a bus turnaround nearby. This is the Oakton Station, the original one, which was eventually torn down. And then in the early 2000s, it was replaced by a new station by the CTA, the only one on the Yellow Line branch. Map showing tracks downtown and how some of the station platforms were lengthened and actually combined. You could walk from one station to another. From 1913 to 1969, the loop was unidirectional. It ran counterclockwise, both tracks. There was, and even before that, it was bidirectional, but left-hand running. This is around 1905. Looking west along Van Buren from Tower 12. Looking north along Wabash from Tower 12. Again, with the loop running, left-hand running bidirectional. This is early 1940s Evanston Express heading north on Wabash. This is a Met car, but it had a trolley pole installed on it, very unusual, running as a single car in the Douglas Park branch. This is one of the very early Lake Street L cars with dating back to when they were left-hand running. You see the operator is on the left. This train is heading northbound actually in 1966 on the from Wabash going onto Lake. This is on Lake Street, gate car. Again on Lake Street, this is the old station at Clark and Lake. Tower 18 was the busiest train intersection in the world for many years. You can see with all these different trains going in different directions. And they were, because of congestion, they had to lengthen some platforms and actually combined stations so they'd have more places to put the trains. This is a metal car in the rear and a wood car in the front. Something that they were still doing by 1955. This is the looking north along Wells, where there was an old connection to the Met L. This is Tower 8. Straight ahead was the connection to the Met. Eventually that was removed, and later on in the early 1960s, here's how it looked. Everything is gone. The tower, the tracks, all removed. The opening of the State Street subway in 1943 removed some trains from the L and actually helped it a lot by reducing the congestion. This is the first official train in the State Street subway in 1943. And then the Dearborn subway, which opened in 1951, also reduced congestion. And some of the heaviest ridership now is in the subways. Here is the Loop L in 1964 with a Ravenswood train on it, still running in the counterclockwise direction. And Tower 18 is being dismantled and replaced in 1969 because they needed a different connection there for the new Lake Dan Ryan line. 1959, this is stationed at State Street, State and Van Buren. 5 different kinds of L trains are visible in this picture, showing you how they've changed over the years. This is a wood car coupled to a 4000 series metal L car. Post-war, first post-war cars from 1947, 1948. More modern, more features. Some old wooden L cars in storage at Lockwood Yard. As you can see, vandals have broken some of the windows before these things were scrapped. And often just simply set on fire is something you would not, they would not do that today because of the pollution. Riders on a train, a 4000 series L train in 1970. And here's some riders in 2019 on one of the CTA's historic cars, one of the 6000 series cars, which have been brought back to be part of their heritage fleet. This is the interior of a 2000 series L car, which was the first ones that had air conditioning. After the 6000 were retired, some of them went to serve in Pennsylvania on the Norristown line. There's a restored gate car. There's only one in existence at the Illinois Railway Museum. It's been brought back to its original appearance in 1898. The interurban here, the Chicago Aurora and Elgin, here it crossed the Des Plaines River in Forest Park. Here's some Aurora and Elgin cars in Lockwood Yard near Laramie Avenue. Everything west of Laramie was owned by the Aurora and Elgin. The interior of an Aurora and Elgin car, right before it was scrapped in 1962. Aurora and Elgin cut back their service to Forest Park in 1953. They didn't want to be involved with the temporary right-of-way the CTA had. In 1957, they were allowed to stop passenger service, and here is a later train, which was an attempt to get things going again, but it didn't work. The line was abandoned. And here it is in 1959, about 2 years after abandonment. And they had freight service also on that line out in the suburbs, the western suburbs, going to Aurora and Elgin. Here's the very last ever Aurora and Elgin train, which was to pick up all the unused freight cars along the line. It's called a cleanup train. This is in Villa Park, and the station is still there, and now the right-of-way has been turned into the Illinois Prairie Path. The North Shore Line is the streamlined electroliner at the North Shoreline Station in Milwaukee. North Shore Line train running on the ground right in the street in Kenilworth. Here's a train in, I believe this is Evanston. And in Waukegan. They had their own ticket agent and station downtown at Adams and Wabash. For the connection there, you could walk into the L. On the Shoreline route, it branched off from the Evanston branch, and here went down Greenleaf Avenue in Wilmette before heading north. Here's how that same location looks today. There's a Panera where the station used to be. Here's a North Shoreline train stopping at one of the L stations in Evanston. They had their own platforms. They could keep people separated. They couldn't just hop onto a CTA train. They had the use of much of the Roosevelt Road station because the CTA wasn't using it after the State Street subway opened. Here is the motorman taking off the last, the headlight off the very last North Shoreline train in January 21, 1963. After the North Shoreline quit, the two electroliners went to Pennsylvania, and here they are running on the Norristown high-speed line as part of Red Arrow. There were some stations stub end terminal stations, 4 of them on the loop elevated, and despite of the fact that they were all connected. The most complicated track arrangement was at the Wells Street terminal. Each of the 4 privately owned companies had built their own stub end terminal. Here's electrified train heading into the old Congress terminal in the late 1890s as the Southside L was being electrified. The old Congress terminal, which was originally where the Southside L ended up before the Loop L was built. Congress terminal hung around for a while because it was still being used by the North Shore Line to load baggage. So here it is in 1962, they're loading baggage onto a train, which then would head back to Roosevelt Road and then head north on the L, ending up in Milwaukee. This is the North Waters terminal at left. Here you can see the walkway branching off from the Merchandise Mart. This is the North Water Terminal. Again, another stub end terminal. Eventually, they had very few trains that terminated there. This is the inaugural trip of the Electroliner in 1941. And they introduced a new paint scheme called the Silverliner paint scheme in 1950 at the North Water Terminal. The CTA also used it to introduce the new 6000 series cars in 1950. And this is the entrance to the North Water Terminal, which was removed in the early 1960s. Doesn't exist anymore. The loop had a branch here going down Market Street, which is now Wacker Drive. This is the lake where the Lake Street all terminated before they built the rest of the loop. Had 2 stations on this Market Street branch, ending just north of Madison Street by the Civic Opera House. All this had to go when they decided to build Lower Wacker Drive. And there was the Wells Street Terminal, served by the Met and by Aurora and Elgin trains. Opened in 1905. That's an Aurora and Elgin train in the early 1920s. This is the original configuration of the Wells Street Terminal before they added some more floors to it in the 1920s and renovated it. You can see that part of it was like a facade. And then later, the CTA made a new L connection through the old Wells Street Terminal in 1955 when they had to get rid of the L that had been on the old L connection on Market Street. And here is an Aurora and Elgin train coming out of the Wells Street Terminal. 0 on the tower there means that the heat should be set to 0 because this is summertime. This is an electrical substation, which dates back to the old Met L. It's still there today, even though the L itself is not. And here's Shirley Temple taking a ride on the L in 1938. At the height of her popularity, she was 10 years old at the time. There's a letter someone wrote to the Met in 1890. Well, the Met wrote this letter in 1896 trying to collect a debt for advertising that by a cycle company, which had not been paid. Here are some weekly passes from the Rapid Transit Company in the 1920s, 30s. The old L reached a high point in 1926 when hundreds of thousands of people went to the Eucharistic Congress in Mundelein. And then this is the Morgan Street Station with a train decorated with the flag of the city of Chicago, which seems an appropriate thing for our presentation today. Our book is connected to my blog, the Trolley Dodger blog. You can purchase my book through the trolleydodger.com. And if you buy the book from me, I will not only sign it, but you'll get a facsimile map of a 1926 map showing the rapid transit system. And on the back of it, useful facts about the L at that time. And we've reached the end of the line. That is the end of our program. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And as I say, the book is available through me and also through Amazon and wherever Arcadia books are sold.
Thank you so much, David. That was fantastic. We have a couple of questions from the audience that they wanted to ask you, so we'll go through them. One of them is, can you talk a little bit about some of the reasons why some of the lines were shut? And I realize there may be many reasons.
Yes, the Humboldt Park branch ran right next to North Avenue, and the CTA felt, after they had consolidated the surface system in the L, they felt that people would just as well ride trolley buses on North Avenue. And they also didn't want to buy new equipment for such a lightly used line, which didn't really go far enough, and it didn't really make any sense to stop where it did. If they could have extended it, that would have been a very, very popular line, but they didn't want to buy new L cars to run on there. And so they wanted to shut it down, and it was only operated as a shuttle for a year before they finally did shut it down. Then the Stockyards faded away, and they had a lease, a 50-year lease on the Stockyards and Kenwood lines with the company that owned and built those lines. And when that lease ran out, they couldn't come to terms. They hadn't been making payments in many years. The Rapid Transit Company stopped paying rent on the Kenwood line in the 1930s, and from that point forward, they were hassling each other about who's responsible for paying for this and who's responsible for the upkeep and things like that. So finally, they just completely got rid of that. The Normal Park line was only 3/4 of a mile long, and it really didn't go anywhere. So that had to go. The Niles Center branch was the one that came back as the Skokie Swift once the North Shoreline quit and the CTA bought 5 miles of the right-of-way. The Garfield Park line was rebuilt as the Congress median line of the rapid transit. The Douglas Park was cut back. It was lightly used, and they had a lot of grade crossings, which were all manually operated. They didn't have automatic crossings at these streets. They wanted to install automatic crossings, but Berwyn was opposed to it. So there were some people in these early days, like the early 1950s, who didn't trust automatic gates. They wanted it to be manually operated. So they couldn't come to terms about that, and therefore the CTA just said, okay, well, we'll just cut it back to 54th Avenue, and you can ride the bus on Cermak, which is right there. So there were different reasons why many of these things were cut back. The Lake Street L could have been cut back, but it wasn't, because they managed to put that western portion that ran on the ground onto the embankment, which was right next to it, which was very fortunate, and that worked out well for everyone. But these were little branch lines which were feeding into the main lines, and then they had some express tracks and local tracks. But the whole idea was kind of outmoded, because the CTA wanted to speed up service and just have everything be an express, and that didn't fit in with having all these little branch lines.
That makes sense. We got a couple of specific questions, which I don't know if you'll know the answer to, but
okay.
One person asks, what about the Kyler shuttle? Was it originally an L line or always just a shuttle? Do you know anything about the Kyler shuttle?
Well, yes, that was a branch off of the Lake Street L in the very early days. Now, in Oak Park, all of the L's wanted to have branch lines. As it turned out, the only one who didn't really have a successful branch line was the Lake Street L. But their success was simply in extending the service from Laramie, where the L ended, all the way into Oak Park and Forest Park, which happened in 1901. But there were these other attempts to have the trains going in different places in Oak Park, which basically were running kind of like as a streetcar operation. And as the area began to develop, the local people didn't want that, and they started hassling the Rapid Transit Company about that. And in some cases, you had people tearing up the tracks in the middle of the night, and things like that, and trying to void their franchises and different things. So the Cuyler L was a very minor kind of operation, and it only lasted for a few years, and it wasn't successful in any way, shape, or form. And then as the L was then consolidated in the early 1900s, it just went away. So that was the Cuyler L.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize people would be tearing up their own tracks. They were so mad about the train.
They didn't want the trains in there running down their street. In their nice and peaceful neighborhood.
Someone else asked, my neighborhood L stop is currently under construction, and it has been terrible for the neighborhood, especially the small businesses. What do you think are the biggest impacts of L stations on neighborhoods in Chicago, good or bad?
Well, the L was responsible for much of the growth of the city. If you look at specific neighborhoods, you can see that for a fact. The Uptown neighborhood in particular, it was like a boom town in the 1920s, and it was all because of the access that you had from the L, not only heading south to downtown, but eventually starting in 1919, you could take a train there and go all the way to Milwaukee on the North Shore Line. So the benefit was by far outweighed any inconvenience that you might have had. And since the tracks are separated from street level, you could hardly say that there is anything that's inconvenient about it. I mean, construction, yes, you have construction going on probably for a few years in some of these places, but you're rebuilding something which lasted, an embankment, for example, which lasted for 100 years. And if they rebuild it now, I'm sure the plan would be that it would last for another 100 years. So when you look at it in the long term, putting up with some inconvenience for 2 or 3 years is not that inconvenient in a long-term scheme of things.
It's true, yeah. Someone else asks, why is the Logan Square platform so long? Do you know?
Well, I'm sure that it has to do with the fact that you have you want to have entrances at different places, and so the street grid layout would influence that. And as long as the platform is long enough to accommodate any conceivable train that they might run, it would be long enough in theory. But you also have to have entrances and exits, and in many highly used stations, you want to have two, one at each end. So the street grid layout, I'm sure, had something to do with the locations of the entrances and exits there, and how long the platform is.
Someone else asks, what do you think is the value of public transportation, especially as we are facing increasing environmental challenges and climate change? Should we be reversing some of what your book says and expanding our public transit options further?
Yes, I think it makes the city livable in the way that we have become accustomed to it. The gridlock that you would have if you had no L system or subways, the gridlock would just be so much worse, and the air pollution and everything. It just makes life in the city, in the downtown, possible. the way that that we've become accustomed to it. And I think everything possible should be done to expand it. But we expect so much more now from our transit and our transit stations and the L cars and the kinds of stations that we want to have. I mean, when you build something now, it's not like you were building it in 1895. In some cases, then you would just lay some tracks on the ground and build a very simple platform, and there's your station. But now you want it to be handicapped accessible. You have an elevator. You have amenities. You have like say the Uptown Station was rebuilt, and that cost $250 million. But the station will be there probably for 100 years. And so, and when you look at it that way, it's an investment. It's sort of like, as a society, we ask ourselves, what is the value of all this to us? And I think in economic terms, you would say the value is quite great. And because the value is quite great, we give it this importance, and we wanted to achieve certain things. And so the kinds of requirements that you have now kind of dictate the expense and the planning that goes into it. They've been planning the extension of the Red Line south of 95th Street for years, and eventually it will be built and it will serve more people, but it isn't done willy-nilly kind of way that it was in the 1890s. It's like, well, we'll just build this and we'll see what happens, you know?
That's true. Well, I think we have time for one more question, and I saved this one for last because I like it a lot. If you personally could wave a magic wand and bring back one of the lost L's in your book or change something else, what would you choose? So if you had a magic wand.
The Humboldt Park branch. If it could have been extended, running north of, I realize it ran just north of North Avenue, but the northwest side of the city had so very little service. Why would you want to get rid of any of it, would be my point of view on that. They didn't have the money to extend it, and by the time the city really took over everything, the only way that they wanted to do anything was a subway, and of course that would have been very expensive to build. And so that was, I think, a missed opportunity. But of course, when you look at all the different things that were eliminated, you can find good logical reasons for why all those decisions were made. It's hard to argue with the decisions that were made in 1952, when the resources were so much more limited, and they just didn't know where all the money was going to come from, and there was no federal aid for transit. Everything had to kind of sink or swim, living out of the fare box. And so, if they didn't have the finances and the resources to keep some of these things going, they had to pick and choose. So it's kind of hard to fault the decision making that was involved in that now.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, David. This has been really wonderful. Again, don't forget, if you want to get a copy of the book, of course, you can check it out at the Chicago Public Library, but you want to visit David's blog for all kinds of other information. And tell us again the name of your blog.
It is called The Trolley Dodger, and it is at thetrolleydodger.com. So if you just do a Google search on Trolley Dodger, I'm sure it'll come up.
That's great. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank David Sadowski for being here with us. Thanks to CPL Tech Leland Mosley for producing this event, and thanks to all of you for being here. Don't forget, please visit onebook1chicago.org for information about upcoming events around our theme, Neighborhoods, Our City's Bedrock, including book discussions, films, author events, art programs, and more. Also, visit the CPL YouTube and Facebook pages for on-demand video content, including from tonight's program. Have a great week, everyone.